My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 32 years old now, and for most of my life, my father had a nickname for me that he thought was funny: the spare. Not the favorite, not the problem child, just the extra. The kid who sat quietly while the real conversations happened around the table. The one people forgot to include in the family photos until someone said, "Wait, where's Elena?" If you had asked my father 10 years ago who would keep the Brooks family together, he wouldn't have hesitated. He would have pointed straight at my older brother, Jason. Jason, the athlete. Jason, the business major. Jason, the guy who could walk into a room and somehow make everyone believe he belonged there. And me? I was the nurse who worked night shifts and showed up late to holidays with tired eyes and hospital coffee on my breath. Not impressive, not important, just dependable. And for a long time, I told myself that was enough. Until the afternoon my father stood in the middle of a crowded backyard and said something that finally snapped the last thread holding my silence together. But to understand why that moment mattered, you have to go back a few years. Back before my daughter was born. Back before anyone knew the truth about who had been quietly holding our family together the whole time. 4 years ago, I was 28 and exhausted. Not the kind of tired a good night's sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones after 12-hour ER shifts, back-to-back weekends, and studying for certification exams during lunch breaks in your car because the break room was too loud. I remember the night I passed my critical care certification. I sat in the parking lot outside the testing center with my phone in my hand for 5 minutes before calling my father. I don't know why I still wanted his approval at that point. Maybe because some part of me never stopped being the little girl waiting at the end of the dinner table hoping someone would notice she'd done something good. He answered on the third ring. I told him the news. There was a pause. 3 seconds maybe. Then he said, "That's nice." And before I could even respond, he added, "Did Jason tell you about his promotion? Regional sales manager now, big office." Just like that. My entire accomplishment vanished in under 10 seconds. If you grew up in a family like mine, you know exactly how that feels. Not like being insulted, something quieter than that. Like being edited out of the story. Growing up in the Brooks house meant understanding one simple rule. Jason was the headline, I was the footnote. Thanksgiving that year proved it again. We were sitting around the long oak table my parents had owned since before I was born. Turkey in the center, mashed potatoes, my mother's cranberry sauce nobody actually liked, but everyone pretended to. My father stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass and said, "To Jason, the future of this family." Everyone clinked glasses, everyone smiled, and I sat at the far end of the table next to the gravy bot that nobody passed my way. My mom reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "He doesn't mean it like that," she whispered. But she didn't say anything to him. She never did. I told myself I didn't care, but later that night my husband, Ethan, showed me something that changed everything. Ethan is an engineer, calm, logical, the kind of guy who fixes things quietly without announcing it. He had gone over to my parents' house earlier that week to help my dad repair a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. While he was working, he noticed a stack of mail on the counter. One envelope had bright red letters across the front. Past due. 3 months. Final notice. The mortgage company. My father had always bragged that the house was paid off, that he had everything under control. Turns out that wasn't true. After retiring early from the factory, his pension wasn't covering nearly as much as he pretended. Savings had been draining for years, and foreclosure was 60 days away. I remember sitting on the couch staring at that photo on Ethan's phone like the air had been sucked out of the room. I called Jason that night. He sounded stressed before I even finished explaining. "Things are tight right now," he said. His divorce had wrecked his finances. Credit cards. Legal fees. The golden child was drowning too. He just wore nicer shoes while it happened. I lay awake most of that night staring at the ceiling, because even after everything, I couldn't watch my parents lose their home. So the next morning, I called someone who understood money better than anyone I knew. My mother-in-law, Susan Carter, a retired accountant who had spent 30 years auditing companies twice the size of my entire hometown. She listened quietly while I explained the situation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something that stuck with me. "If you're going to help them, Elena, do it smart." Within 2 weeks, she connected me with a financial advisor who helped set up a small trust account. Every month, $2,500 would be deposited into my parents' bank account. On their end, it looked like an adjustment to pension benefits. No questions, no embarrassment, no arguments, just enough to keep the mortgage paid. The first transfer went through in March. That same week, my father called Jason. I heard about it later from my mom. "Looks like the pension office fixed my account," he said proudly. Jason laughed and told him he knew it would work out. Nobody thanked me. Nobody even knew. And that's how the next 4 years passed. Month after month, transfer after transfer. Quiet. Invisible. Ethan knew. Susan knew. And that was it. 4 years later, the total had reached almost $120,000. Money I could have used for student loans, or a bigger house, or literally anything else. But I kept sending it because my mom lived there, and because some part of me still believed family meant showing up even when nobody noticed. Then I got pregnant, and everything changed. 5 months along, I posted the ultrasound picture in the family group chat. My mom cried. Jason sent a thumbs up. My father replied 40 minutes later with one sentence. "Hope the kid takes after Ethan." That was it. Not congratulations, not excitement, just another reminder that in his mind, I was still the weak link in the family chain. The day my daughter was born should have been perfect. I had been in labor for 14 hours. Ethan was exhausted. I was shaking with relief when the nurse finally placed that tiny, warm bundle against my chest. 7 pounds, dark hair, the smallest little fingers wrapped around mine. I remember thinking, this is the beginning of everything. 4 hours later, my father walked into the hospital room. He didn't hug me, didn't congratulate Ethan. He leaned over the bed, looked at my daughter, and said something that made the entire room go silent. "Well, maybe this one will actually accomplish something." My husband stood up so fast his chair slammed into the wall. My mother looked out the window like she hadn't heard it, and I just held my daughter a little tighter. Because in that moment, I realized something. For 32 years, I had waited for my father to change, and he never would. 2 weeks later, he hosted a brunch for the baby. 30 guests, neighbors, relatives, friends from the old factory. White tablecloths in the backyard, pink balloons tied to the fence, a big banner that said, "Welcome, baby Olivia." The head table had place cards. My father, Jason, my mom, a few family friends. My name wasn't there. My seat was at a smaller table near the edge of the yard, right next to the trash bins. My daughter's welcome party, and I was sitting in the overflow section. When my father started his speech, the entire yard went quiet. He talked about family legacy, about pride, about Jason being the one who would carry the Brooks name forward. Then he looked over at Ethan holding Olivia and said, "Let's just hope she inherited her father's ambition." People laughed awkwardly. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not angry, not hurt, just finished. I stood up, walked to the main table, and asked if I could say a few words. My father rolled his eyes but waved his hand. "Make it quick." So I did. I thanked everyone for coming, then I told them something they didn't know. 4 years ago, my parents were 60 days away from losing their home. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's face turned pale. I explained the transfers. $2,500 a month. 48 months. Every single payment. Then Ethan's mother placed the printed statements on the table. 48 lines. One for each month. My father checked his phone at that exact moment. A notification popped up. The transfers had been permanently discontinued. For the first time in my life, my father had absolutely nothing to say. We left 5 minutes later. No shouting, no drama, just silence. A week passed. Then one evening, my doorbell rang. It was my father, standing on the porch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He said 3 words before I could even ask why he came. I was wrong. We talked for 2 hours that night. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. He admitted something he had never said out loud before. He had always been afraid of me. Not because I was weak, because I didn't need him, and he didn't know how to handle that. 2 months later, he held Olivia for the first time. She grabbed his finger, and the toughest man I'd ever known almost started crying. Things still aren't perfect. They might never be. But my daughter will never sit at the end of the table wondering if she matters. Because I learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding everything together. And sometimes the moment you finally speak up is the moment everyone realizes it.